Welcome to CS Week Success Stories, second Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern webinar series. These webinars are the top-rated workshops from our attendees for Conference 39, held last May in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Lisa Collins with CS Week, and I'll be your moderator today, and Denise Mullendore is your host. CS Week and Conference 40 will be held April 25th to 29th, 2016 at the Phoenix Convention Center in Phoenix, Arizona. This program will be recorded and available for playback along with our other archived presentations. Just scroll down to the bottom on our homepage and look for the blue webinar box on the right-hand side. Attendees are encouraged to upload questions in the Q&A panel on the lower right-hand of your screen. Be sure to click the All tab to make sure that we all see your question. We will wait until the end of the presentation to answer questions. And so today our program is titled The Social Community. Our presenter is Tracy Kirk, Manager, Customer Technology with PSE&G. She's been with PSE&G since 1997. After creating the customer care function for the corporation's deregulated subsidiary, and then managing the utility customer relations group, Tracy led the development of all customer-facing functions within the CIS replacement project, including SAP CRM, web self-service, and interactive voice response system. She continues to support these while implementing new interaction channels such as mobile web and texting, including preference management and outage communications. For the past 2 years, she has led the transition to engaging customers and providing service through social media, and is soon to kick off an omni-channel engagement strategy. Welcome, Tracy.
Hi, and thanks so much. Appreciate everybody joining us for today's conversation, and looking forward to hearing your questions at the end so we can spend more time on the areas of social media that are most important to you. We'll go through our journey here, and hopefully some of the things that we've done and some of the things that we've learned will be of use to you. We just gotta, nope, sorry, wrong way. So we got a lot of attention for our social media efforts here as it pertained to Superstorm Sandy. And, you know, I've titled my presentations on social media, Too Big for Twitter, very specifically because of some conversations that we had with executives here leading up to Superstorm Sandy. And I'll explain how that came to be. Just need to, there we go. So we started here at PSE&G using social media for one-way messaging back in 2009. We had one Twitter handle called PSE&G Outage Info, and it was owned and handled exclusively by corporate communications at that time. When corporate communications was pushing messages out, and it was you know, true to the name of the handle, predominantly outage information during storm situations and pretty much radio silence otherwise, they found that customers began to engage them back and ask questions and come to the handle and pose things that, that corporate communications really wasn't in a position to answer. And we started working with them, my group in customer technology, to look at what was the right way to go about engaging customers on a two-way basis. And we began that in 2012, so almost 3 years ago. Oh my God, is that almost 4 years ago? Time flies. So we had, at that point, 3 Twitter handles. We did not go into Facebook until after Superstorm Sandy. We had the 3 handles, and my group, who comes out of customer operations and has access to all of our systems and knows our customer handling processes, began engaging with customers through Twitter. We learned a lot during that pilot. We we learned how important it was to develop relationships with our influencers. We practiced getting a consistency of tone. In social media, it can be quite a challenge to blend enough individuality and personality into the messages, especially on Twitter, where you have so few characters to work with, while still having a consistency of tone from a brand perspective, that people are speaking and conveying a face of the company that is consistent and people can feel like they know what to expect. We practiced working with the field operations folks with how to handle social media events. Were we going to give them special treatment? Were we going to treat them like any other inquiry? What got escalated? What didn't? Should we give people special treatment just because they came to social media and their complaint was public? We used that pilot period to determine we would not provide to a customer any response that wasn't merited just because they were on social. We learned how to deliver a very soft no and have that conversation in a way that still built the relationship and still built trust with customers. They knew they got heard. They might understand the answer better. We might make sure that everything had been reviewed, but we didn't give them any response that wasn't warranted, as I said, by the merits of their inquiry. So we did, as a whole, through that process, learn that these two-way interactions could be very rewarding. We could be much more transparent with our customers, even in a public setting, without creating the kinds of problems that people had said, oh, you're gonna cause regulatory problems. This is gonna be a legal nightmare, and we found that was not the case. But we had to think through those things, keep all those folks involved. So these 6 months between when we initiated the pilot and when Sandy hit, some of the things that had not yet come up were how to ramp up for a significant event. That 6-month period was very quiet from a storm perspective, and so we really did not have a lot of experience with a large outage scenario before Sandy hit. We did not know at that time how to handle social media events that went on and on and on, as it felt like Sandy did, handling volume, more inquiries than just a few a day. And then routing and workflow handling were things that we had done from the perspective of very manual processes, but we did not have tools in place that allowed us to route work and handle things at scale. So, Sandy hit, and we really were not geared up for that from the perspective of really being experienced with it. So a lot of what we did during Sandy was our uncharted territory. The storm was of a magnitude that was unprecedented, really, at the time. Even though the storm, when it came ashore, was really, a Category 1 hurricane, not a 5. The size and scope of it, the power of the winds, caused much more damage even than a lot of storms that have higher ratings. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that it came into a particular geographic area and pushed so much water into very densely populated areas. So this was new ground for all of us. We had certainly had a lot of practice over the prior couple of years with storms like Irene and Tropical Storm Lee, like Snowtober, which caused more damage to our equipment even than Irene, which had previously been our most devastating storm. So we had gotten used to those things. For several years we kept saying, well, that's the biggest storm in our history. And then the next one came along, and that was the new biggest storm in our history. Sandy made us actually change the whole scale of the chart by which we showed storm devastation. probably similar to you and all of our peers, we were used to being a utility in the role of trusted advisor, and like a Walter Cronkite, we could say with authority, and that's the way it is because we knew our business, and we were not accustomed to engaging customers in a truly transparent way where they might see the inner workings and know that the sausage making, behind the scenes looks pretty chaotic, right? We were used to presenting to the public, polished, poised, we've got this under control, boys, kind of MO. But when Sandy struck and we had lost over 1 million customers in the span of an hour and ended up losing what amounted to, the 90% of our customer base during the course of the early part of the storm, our customers were completely at a loss, and they were out throughout the state clamoring for information, for advice and expertise that we did not have. We did not know the extent of the damage for the first several days. So we couldn't tell people how long it'll take to get things back on when it was taking days just to assess the damage. We had the kind of logistical and infrastructure problems that had not been seen before in the area. Things like all the gas stations that had no power and so people couldn't get gas. That was, that was something that people did not know how to deal with in New Jersey. What do you mean the gas stations are closed? And we hadn't seen gas lines like that since the oil embargoes in the early 70s. So they are clamoring for information, and we were in a completely new situation with how we needed to engage with customers under circumstances where we did not have the expertise and all the answers that we would have normally had. So what we needed to do was engage with our customers in a different way, much more like Oprah than a Walter Cronkite persona. We needed to be empathetic and warm and caring and develop dialogue with customers showing that, hey, we're all in this together and we understand how you feel and we are working on it and we are doing everything, and maintain their trust in our ability to figure it out even at a time when we did not have the answers. So leading into the storm, we had to make the case that this fledgling social media pilot was ready to engage customers in this way. And the first thing that some of our executives wanted to do was, well, you got to shut down Twitter because we are going to be way too busy to deal with that. And, this storm, one of our vice presidents said to me in a call, said, no, this storm is way too big for Twitter. And I was like, you can't open a channel and then at the time when customers need it the most, take it away from them. So we developed a plan of how we were going to use social and how we were not going to use social in order to make sure that everybody understood what we were and were not going to do, what the channel would and would not be used for, and get internal trust and confidence in the plan before the storm hit. So in the days leading up to the storm, what we did was practiced and set up for all the people who were going to be responding to customers. Here's our tone. Here are the key points of our messaging. We gave everybody a page full of proposed tweets that they could potentially use, not so much to save them them the time of typing out 140 characters, but to make sure that everybody was on the same page with what are the ways we are expressing ourselves about this? What kind of language are we using? We knew that we were not going to be able to answer every customer. We had no idea how barraged we were going to get with inbound tweets, but we could foresee that we were not going to be able to get to every individual customer. So we needed to have a triage mechanism and identify the cases where we were going to pick those tweets out of the barrage and deal with them. Influencers, we knew, had to be in the mix because we needed their help in getting our message out and leveraging the size of their followers. Going into the storm, we had just recently hit the 10,000 follower milestone, and we had Twitter relationships with people like Newark Mayor Cory Booker and some of the other elected officials in the state who had also been using social media. Cory Booker had over 1 million followers at the time. So if you could get Cory Booker to help you get your message out, you were taking a reach not just of 10,000, but you were leveraging his reach of over 1 million. So using influencers was obviously going to be a very high priority. We were looking for situations where we could make a difference to an individual customer. If you have one customer who's saying, you know, hey, my power's out, when's it coming back on, compared to a customer with a very specific situation where we could say, hey, you know, to the folks out in the field, we've got a customer here with a particular situation that you guys can go do something about. You know, somebody with a sick child and they need to get them to the hospital and there's a wire down across their driveway. We can do something about that. But the run-of-the-mill, you know, ordinary outage situations, a lot of those we simply, you know, could not address. If the customer's question was broad enough that answering that question was going to benefit not just that customer, but a much wider audience, those got priority. If there were customers from whom we could gather specific information that we could relay out to the folks in the field, those were priorities. For threats, sad but true, we did have people who made threats of physical violence to our crews, and yeah, the logic of it may completely go over our heads. Like, I'm sorry, but how does it help you if you threaten to, you know, bash in the head of the next public service guy you see coming down the street? He's not going to be able to get your service back on. But that's the kind of thing that was happening. There were over 24 very specific physical threats of harm during the course of that storm, and so we had a working relationship with our corporate security folks to address those. And then one of the most important things we could do was help customers understand that for different types of information and different types of needs, the best channel to use, you know, might be you've got to call the call center for that, or, you know, here's the information on our website, or whatever the case may be. We were able to re-educate customers and get them to the right channel, get them to the right party to get the assistance they needed. We did not then, and we still do not, use Twitter or any social media channel as a transactional vehicle. We were not taking outage reports through that, and we would you know, redirect those customers to appropriate channels. We would give them links to the various work plans. We'd help engage them with restoration pictures, updates, safety information that was out there, retweeting information from other service agencies like the Red Cross and FEMA, you know, elected officials who were providing information. We used them and they used us to disseminate information to each other's followers. where the mobile customer service centers were going to be. How do you get ice and water? Where are charging stations to be found? So those are the kinds of content that were being pushed out. A few pieces of the puzzle that helped us be successful through the storm. One was to coordinate and make sure that there was one source of truth and that all of our communication channels were working in concert. That was something we'd thankfully made some painful mistakes over the prior big storms, through Irene and through Snowtober, through that March nor'easter, where we hadn't always been in sync, and the message was getting out there in a fragmented way, or where one channel was getting ahead of the other. The Board of Public Utilities was getting its outage numbers from one source, whereas 20 minutes later somebody else was publishing a different number. So those kinds of things caused confusion, and we learned from that and made sure that we had a very tight process to get information out across all the different channels in a smooth way. We also learned that you can't get ahead of the story, and you certainly don't want to be the one making the news with social media. Towards the end of the storm, we just as we thought some of the last customers were coming back on at the end of the second week, we lost a substation that had already been restored once, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 60,000 to 80,000 customers lost power after they had recently had power restored. And one of the folks in my group thought they had reliable information about that because social media was lighting up about, what was happening now with the new outage. And so he thought he had reliable information and was in a hurry to get it out there, but it wasn't coordinated with the other channels, and it turned out that his information was premature. But because it was out there, media channels had picked it up and had already reported the number he was given by a field supervisor, but it turned out that was not an accurate number. And we had to go back and do damage control afterwards because he reported a number 20,000 customers higher than the actual number. This is not where you want to be. You need to make sure that that process doesn't get ahead of itself, and that information is traveling at the speed of the internet, and it creates this pressure and this race to get information out there. And it's very important to keep up, but it's also important to make sure that you're accurate. If you're getting stuff out there fast, but you're causing yourself more harm than good in the long run by not following the process, you're really shooting the process in the foot. Flexibility and being adaptable. There is always something that comes up in social media that you've never run into before, something brand new. Last year on the Super Bowl, it was a customer with a crowdsourced funding. He'd been shut off for non-payment, and it got into a very sensitive media relationship where they had a sick child in the family. They'd been shut off for non-payment several times. They'd turned themselves back on in a way that made it for very unsafe conditions at their house. When we went back out and shut them off again, and they started a GoFundMe campaign for this family, and the news media picked it up. And we didn't know, we'd been doing social media for a couple of years, but suddenly we're dealing with, well, what's this GoFundMe campaign? How do we handle that? The news media was coming at it from multiple sides, and we could not actually provide the truth of the matter because that would have violated customer privacy. So these are tricky situations, and if you're not flexible and you haven't built the fundamentals into your program, if you're trying to do everything by having guided processes and manuals and approvals and everything, you're going to be so hindered that you're not going to be able to deal with things on the fly like this. It ended up costing a great many people most of their Super Bowl weekend. As a matter of fact, it was a more exciting, in a bad way, Super Bowl weekend than the year before when we were the host of the Super Bowl and worried about an outage or something like that at the game. So being flexible is important, and being empowered. If you train your folks and they understand the principles and the guidelines and they understand the spirit of what you're trying to accomplish, if the relationships and the partnerships with the right resources are in place, then when unforeseen things come at you, you can handle them in an appropriate way and respond to them in a way that's going to build on your successes rather than something that's going to set you back. If you notice on the right-hand side, the circus acrobats, they're working without a net. And social media is very much like working without a net. It is something that the players need to understand and accept, and that our executives needed to understand and accept, because the possibility for mistake is there. You tweet something or you put something on Facebook and it's a mistake. It's a case of bad judgment. Somebody said something you really wish they hadn't said. You can take it down, you can hide it, you can delete it, but if somebody's grabbed a screenshot of it, it's going to live on. And we've stubbed their toe like that a couple of times. Twice in the last 4 years that come to mind, where there was this knee-jerk reaction that said, "Oh, we can't, we have to put approvals on people. That this is a bad way to go. We need more control over this." And the fact of the matter is, any of us, any of our colleagues in any job or role has the possibility always of making a mistake. And social media is no different. The problem is your mistake, if you make it, is very public. And to take away that empowerment and make things go through a series of approvals before it gets out there, you're going to slow things down, hinder things, undermine people's sense of responsibility and ownership to the point that the true power of social media is really lost, right? This is an engagement, it's a dialogue, and just like somebody, standing there with the press may misspeak, you're not going to not have people do that, right? So you have to accept that this is part of being in social media, and you minimize it through training, through empowerment, through having guidelines. But if you try and pigeonhole things, if you try and think you've got everything nailed down, and if that there's a procedure for everything, then you're going to you're going to do yourself harm in the end. So sorry, kick away the soapbox. I think we've talked about this enough. We had one source of truth, and we used that coordinated content to serve for all of our communication channels, and we'd adapt it to be more appropriate for that channel, but the core content was the same, so we had consistency. We were able to onboard volunteers rapidly. In advance of the storm, I personally made the mistake of saying, well, this is certainly not the time when we want to bring on people who've never done this before, because we very quickly found that the group of people who were practiced and experienced in this were simply not going to be enough, even based on the triaging we'd done. We were being completely inundated with tweets. It looked like the ticker tape parade of tweets coming in. So our volunteers, we would get them ramped up, and we would tell them, look for certain kinds of messages, because there were so many messages coming in, even in the absence of a true work management tool, which we had not used one yet at the time. We weren't worried about people responding, two people responding to the same customer, because it was just the odds were so against it. So we told people, look for these kinds of tweets. Here are the kinds of responses that you might want to give them. Personalize it to suit the customer. And we gave the volunteers who didn't have system access and didn't have customer operations experience really simple things like, the customer says they're out. The customer says they need to know where the mobile customer service centers are. They need to know this, they need to know that. Look for them, and here's the kinds of answers that you can give them. And then the more experienced people were freed up for some of those types of tweets that I mentioned before. So the partnership between our group and the corporate communications group that I mentioned early on that we had practiced during that pilot came in very handy, and it continues to be a real important piece of our success. Being flexible and adjusting on the fly is a must. We did not know that there's a limit to the number of tweets you can send in any given time frame. Frankly, it's not the sort of thing under normal circumstances anybody would run up against. Because of the nature of the storm and the volume with which we were tweeting to people, we actually got to the point where we hit the Twitter limit and were blocked from sending any more tweets for a while. We're like, what do we do now? We were completely dead in the water. Tweets are coming in, and there's radio silence from PSE&G. We used a combination, kind of the Kevin Bacon theory, 7 degrees of separation. We knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who got us to the executives at Twitter who removed the threshold for us. Actually, they didn't remove it. They gave us like 3 times the amount of tweets that we could use, and we still bumped up against that a couple more times, and it resets after a certain period. But we had no idea that limit even existed, and they do it to prevent spamming. So it makes perfect sense, but in crisis situations, Twitter came to realize that there needed to be an allowance. We did use a combination. Most of the team was in a room in the contact center where we could get out there and share information that we were hearing with other customer operations leadership, and also take information off the floor and use that to help us. But because social media can be done virtually, we had people who had relocated out of their homes and couldn't make it to work. We had people working in other company locations who said, hey, my regular storm duty is this, but I can give you a couple hours in the morning, or I can give you a couple hours at night. And so we were able to use people on a very flexible schedule and come up with enough coverage. We covered from about 7 or 7:30 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night for the duration of the storm. Leveraging influencers, I've mentioned, and amplifying the positive. When people would say, thank you and have kind words for us, and there was an awful lot of that. We could respond to that in a way that amplified that message where it becomes public to others. And then people who are having difficulty, you move them offline. Publicly, you respond to them, you let it be seen publicly that you're going to answer this, but then you move the individual issue offline and you deal with it via direct messaging and not out in the public eye. So I don't know if you know this story. It's one of my favorites when we're thinking about customers. And in a case like Sandy, where we had 90,000 inbound messages simply during the storm via Twitter, and it felt like, what are we doing here? We're only getting, we responded to 9,000 customers. We had 9,000 outbound tweets. And we're only getting to 1 out of every 10. and there were times when it felt overwhelming. And so we held on to this story, this starfish story, where the beach is covered with starfish that have washed up on the sea, and the old man says to the boy, you know, you're wasting your time. You know, you can't possibly make any difference. There's thousands of starfish here, and the boy is throwing them back one at a time and saying, you know, it made a difference to that one. So, you know, we held on to that at times when it felt like we were not making as much of an impression as we had hoped. So in terms of the kinds of messaging that we sent, I've collected just a sampling here for you of the kinds of messages that went over well with people. You know, the storm, you know, our outbound message, storm was incredible, unprecedented. We're assessing the damage, developing a plan of attack, et cetera. And somebody says, you know, thank you. Please send updates like this. You know, somebody else says, you know, best utility update ever. This is not hard factual information that we're giving people, right? This is not the Walter Cronkite, but people were responding to that Oprah Winfrey style of communication. We're going to get a crew out there. Hang in there. You know, no problem. We want to see you restored as badly as you do. People felt that we were there, we were connecting with them, and that we were in it together, right? We had a partnership. The one on the right-hand side, partly to me, indicates that during a crisis, people will turn anywhere for humor, because if you read it down, frankly, it's not all that funny. He says, that's hilarious, kudos for even responding. You know, it's not hilarious. It's mildly amusing by most standards, but during a storm, the power of a little humor and the power of demonstrating that there's flesh and blood people behind this. You know, it's not Autobots. It's not impersonal automated information. There's people here that you can actually reach us and connect to us. Had a lot of power. Most of us are well aware, especially over the last few years, of the power of social media. And I don't know if you've seen my slide before that showed, you know, the red and the blue. The difference between mobile and desktop versions on our website from an average day to a storm day during Sandy is almost reversed, right? The reliance people have on mobile. The graph over on the left, Facebook paid reach, shows that even more so is social media something that's done by customers via their mobile devices predominantly. This happens to indicate paid reach because that's the statistic that was available, but we have every reason to believe that it's the same across both of our paid and our unpaid content. You know, the customers are using social media predominantly on their mobile devices, and we need to be cognizant of that. So customers, certainly when we had a word cloud done afterwards of all the social media activity, and the overwhelmingly predominant sentiment was one of thanks. You can see there's plenty of red on there, right? I mean, out of 90,000 messages that were coming in and all the interactions that occurred, there were some customers who went away, feeling, less than thrilled with the situation at hand. But overwhelmingly, people responded positively to what we were doing, and we only responded to 10%. So I think that there was a human element where they understood, too, what we were facing because of the humanness of the interaction. So these are some statistics. You guys will have copies of the slides, and you can certainly see the order of magnitude of changes in volume during the storm. And what this really proved, outside of the group of us who had been working on this leading up to Superstorm Sandy, was it really proved the value of social media as a crisis communications channel to the leadership throughout the company, to the same VPs who thought that we should not be using social media during the storm, right? When they were saying, oh, this storm's too big for Twitter. This is new. We don't do new things during storms. We relied on the tried and true, things that are proven successes. We don't experiment during storms. Well, we did experiment during the storm, and it paid off big time. And so the sentiment from here was, okay, great, let's go conquer Facebook now. Could we just get some sleep first? There's some slides here with statistics in case any of you, need those for your reference. People certainly did come to Twitter and Facebook because there were things that the traditional news media were finding new and different as well, and customers were craving information, and they were coming there in droves. We saw an outstanding number of what we call affectionately, mind you, eggheads, right? The people who are so new to Twitter that they have not uploaded a photo yet. It was evident that many people came to Twitter and created a Twitter account for the sole purpose of interacting with us. They had no followers. They were following nobody but us. They had not tweeted, prior to their tweet to us. We were like their first or second or maybe third tweet for a lot of these people. And we even had to educate some of them on, like, how do you direct message? Well, you have to follow us. Well, what does that mean? And we would help them with that kind of thing. The number of followers grew dramatically and quickly. We went into the storm with just over 10,000 followers between the channels that were active at the time, and very quickly ramped up to 60,000. One of the things that we take a lot of pride in was, after the storm, we expected to see some condensation, some falling away of followers, people who had signed up only to get storm information. But what we saw over time was, basically, we maintained that number of followers and grew. We're about 92,000 Twitter followers now, and 64,000 on Facebook. And we attribute it to the fact that after an initial period of going back and getting some sleep and catching back up on 3 weeks worth of email, was we went right back to work with Twitter and continued to provide engagement and information that was of value to them. So they maintained that, right? We didn't lose all those followers, even though they'd just come for the storm. They came and they stayed because they found value there. Interactions and impressions. The net sentiment score during Sandy, you can see that the green portion of this is significantly larger than the red portion throughout the storm. And basically what it tells you is that, for all the people who were frustrated and angry and upset during the storm, the relationship via social media helps them maintain trust and credibility and a positive impression of the organization, even in the face of the most devastating event we'd all seen. Lessons learned. I think we've talked about most of these already. Customers do not expect for organizations to greet their social media activity with silence. And if you're not ready to interact with them on social media, they will find other ways to engage you. We've certainly made a lot of changes and come a long way since Sandy. We've done a great deal in terms of the actual systems and platforms we use. We're currently using Sprinkler as both the workflow management tool, our reporting tool, our content and editorial management, and the actual interactions with customers on social media is handled all through Sprinkler. From an after-hours perspective, we used to have after-hours support covered by my team on an on-call basis. Starting last April, our colleagues in the customer contact area, the call center and the 16 walk-in centers, they began by picking it up, covering for us on holidays so that my team could actually have a holiday without being on call, since they had people staffing the call centers anyway. Starting in April, they hired a full-time social first associate for second shift. So we still handled it during the day, but at the call center, this person came on and was handling it from 3 to 11 every day. And although there wasn't enough volume to occupy him fully, he wasn't somebody whose job it was to do something else and keep an eye on social in the background. He was there to do social, and when social wasn't busy, as a call center supervisor, he had plenty of other things he could do to help in the call center. In August, we actually expanded that, and the contact center brought on a full-time social first person during the day. So my team now handles social media only as backup for the contact centers. All of social media, social care activity is happening currently with customer contact supervisors. And they have all been trained, they've all been brought on, and we continue to support them and serve as a resource for them. We get emails every now and then from one of them who sends something over and says, hey, what do you think about this one? You know, last night, frankly, somebody posted a picture of one of our workmen in an unfavorable position from the back, showing his butt, not his whole butt. He wasn't mooning anybody, but was not particularly favorable. And we had some discussion about, do we hide it? Do we not hide it? You know, should we leave it? So we continue to be a support for that, and my group continues to support the tool and our social media strategy. We have STORM volunteers who are trained and receive regular training. They are now second-tier volunteers because my team has become the first line of defense for ramping up for storms because they have, you know, several years of experience under them already. We joined socialmedia.org, which I would definitely recommend because it's cross-industry. We all spend a lot of time talking to each other about what's working, and we certainly all get a lot of value out of that. Hearing what people are doing in social media in other industries is also really helpful. It gets us, you know, a whole fresh perspective. So socialmedia.org is a really good tool for that. There are a lot of utilities like us who use Sprinkler, and 4 months ago we started a forum amongst ourselves with Sprinkler and do some sharing and best practices there. And one of the things I'm very excited about there is that this group that we formed a few months ago, we've begun exploring the possibility of providing mutual aid to each other for social media during some sort of crisis event using Sprinkler as the common tool. Cross-jurisdiction coordination is a new one for us. We have been working in Long Island, running the electric operations for what used to be LILCO and became LIPA. So we are under a management contract there for the next 10 years to operate the grid there. So we have been trying to figure out how does this look from a social media perspective when people come to our handles and they really are trying to get information from Long Island and vice versa. That's been a wrinkle that we're working out. And the listening tool has been very helpful to us. It's new. We've been using it for about 6 months old. Some of you may be further ahead with a listening tool than us, but it helps the organization listen not just to the social media channels that you're participating in, but to a host of websites, blogs, social media channels, whether you're participating in them or not, for a host of things other than people who are trying to talk directly to you, but they're talking about you, and it helps pull in that information and really inform you about what's happening with your brand out in the public eye. We do track our responsiveness, the ability to compare social metrics to traditional customer service metrics is really evolving, but it's very, very immature at this point in time. these are a couple of interactions that indicate that even outside of a storm situation, one of the wonderful things that social media offers is the ability, when you're helping that one customer, right, that starfish, and you're throwing that starfish back and you're helping one customer out, what social media offers that none of our other channels do offer is that other people can participate in that conversation, and you are putting yourself forward not just to that one person. You know, in the call center, you've got one customer, one conversation, and unless they've recorded the conversation, that's it, that's the end of it. But these conversations can grow. Other people can benefit by the conversation you've had with a different customer, and you can build rapport and engagement even with somebody who may not have reached out to you directly. So that's a real advantage in social media. And I think that's everything. So if you all have some questions, I'd be happy to answer, and anything we don't get to cover now, please do reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk social with folks.
Well, very good, Tracy. Thank you so much. That was just an incredibly informative session. Picked up quite a few points for us here at the office as well. I did have a couple of questions come in. I'd like to start with this one. The question is, what is the policy around customer privacy in instances where they make their account status a public issue?
Sure, that happens fairly commonly, actually. And what we do is we urge the customer to delete that post. We don't generally do it for them, but we respond to them and urge them to delete that and to provide that information in a direct message if it's Twitter, or a private message if it's Facebook, and try and take anything, whether it's their phone number, their address, try and take that all offline and encourage them to protect their own information with that.
Okay, well, that's very good. We had two other questions that came in rather early into the presentation, and I believe you may have answered either at least in part or maybe in whole. I'm going to combine them, so at least because they're both related. It said you mentioned onboarding of volunteers as a key success to the success in the crisis of Sandy. How many individuals were trained and approved to reply to these comments? What are your current overflow plans, and will you use volunteers or set up an outsourced agent? So I combined the questions a little bit there, but I think they were all related.
Sure. During Sandy, there were a total of 22 different people who were trained in Touch Social in some way or another. That includes, the 5 or 6 people in CorpCom who normally do it. And at the time, my group was 5 people. We brought in 12 others, and we rotated them through it from a scheduling perspective, partly to spell the people who were doing social on a full-time basis, and partly to supplement our hours and simply help get out more volume. They came during Sandy, they came from a variety of places. Most customer operations resources, most associates here were, because of their background and skills, were put to work on storm duties doing more traditional roles, escalated calls and customer callbacks and things of that nature. So what we were using, we were actually pulling in people. Sandy was the first storm in our history where the utility actually reached out to the parent company, to the folks in our services organization, like HR and insurance and IT. We had administrative, executive assistants who did some helping. So it's the first time that the utility component of the corporation ever couldn't respond using all of its own folks, plus mutual aid in the field, of course. But we had people from IT going out and staffing mobile customer service centers, for instance, and handing out water and ice, because we could use them for that and free up utility people to do more specialty work. So we were pulling in, we had several people from IT who participated in the volunteer effort, including the first person who volunteered, one of my IT colleagues, who I said, no, thanks very much for offering, but but this is not a time when I can afford to train somebody new, right? I need to rely on my experienced people. And he was the first one I called about day 2 of the storm, and I said, hey, Jerry, you know how you wanted to help? Well, is that offer still good? So some of them, depending on their social media level of expertise when they started, we could give them more different things to do. So what we had them doing during the storm really depended. We were able to grab some of the people who respond to executive inquiries, for instance, and to regulatory inquiries as their normal course of operations. Those things don't generally ramp up and get really busy in a storm until later in the storm, right? You don't usually start getting complaints to your regulators until day 3, day 4 of the storm. So for the first few days, we were able to pull them in. And because they're used to responding to escalated inquiries, they were great to be able to rely on. They could get into the system, they could look things up, they could give people, you know, meaningful information, much like my staff could do, right? So they could handle some of the meatier types of conversations. They were used to sensitive subjects and used to communicating in a way about sensitive subjects so that we weren't worried about what they were saying in the public eye. Unfortunately, then, you know, executive inquiries and regulatory inquiries started ramping up, and we lost their ability to help. The current storm overflow or crisis model would be first that we would rely on the people who have been hired over the last year and trained and have now been for several months handling these things on a day-to-day basis. And then for a mid-sized storm, my team will now become the first line of defense for storm backups. So that continues to be our storm duty as well as the system support that we do. And then we would go to the storm volunteers who are identified. Everybody in customer operations has a storm duty. These folks have been identified. They've been trained in sprinkler. They've been trained in social media. We throw them some softballs now and then to keep them fresh. Not as much as we'd like to, certainly, but you do have the opportunity through the workflow management tool that Sprinkler offers to assign them work and make sure that they remember. How do I sign in? What do I do? How do I use a template? How do I provide a link? Where's the link shortener again? I don't remember. To keep them fresh, so it's going to be less burdensome if we need to turn to them. And then we have another tier of storm volunteers outside the utility. So if we get another storm the magnitude of Sandy, where we have to turn outside the utility back to, you know, what I call the services corporation, you know, HR, IT, accounting, all those folks who are not housed within the utility. We've got a group of them as well, but they would be the fourth line of defense. If we can pull together this model for mutual aid that we're talking about, I think it has a lot of power and a lot of potential. You know, there's a dozen or so utilities in this group that are pretty excited about the possibility here that through Sprinkler, if, you know, Florida Power and Light or PG&E or somebody in the Midwest gets hit with an event that is not affecting the rest of us, we can jump in. We're trained in social media. We're trained in crisis communications. We're trained in the Sprinkler tool. So ramping those people up to help, even if the content's different, should become a very simple and easy process. And we're making some headway on some of the logistics. So I think that's a very exciting development that I'm eager to see come bear fruit.
Sounds good. Sounds like you have a very good handle on everything. Well, I want to be respectful of our attendees' time. Just a couple of closing notes. One, thank you very much, Tracy, for you know, being in the session today. We all appreciated it very much. And also to let the attendees know that the recording will be available later this afternoon on our website. And as a final note, too, also just to remind everyone that the Expanding Excellence Awards deadline has been extended to this Friday. So please go to our website and submit an application. We'd love to read about your success story and have that And then at this time, I think we would end the webinar. Thank you.